Should Picard have been put on trial for committing war crimes against the Borg? Because you know the size of a Borg cube? You know how many Borg drones are in there? It was never stated in the dialogue, but just based on the size alone, if you compare it with an apartment building, with just an average density of an apartment building, and multiply it by the volume of a Borg cube, you'll end up with over 100 million people. Now, we did see there are a bunch of empty spaces inside there, so let's assume that only 2% of the cube is actually populated, so that will make it about 2 million Borg drones in one cube. Now, the first time the Enterprise D encountered the Borg cube, it immediately attacked the Enterprise. Picard tried to negotiate with them, he tried getting away from them, but they kept attacking and also sent their own people over to the Enterprise to attack it, basically sacrificing them. So the Borg had no value of their own people, their own population. They easily sacrifice them, they only care about collecting some of the equipment back from them, but they leave the bodies and vaporize them. So the Borg have little value even for the lives of their own Borg drones. And when they attacked the Enterprise, they sliced a piece of the saucer out and took it into the Borg cube, and they said there are a lot of crew members missing. So since we later find out the Borg like to assimilate people, it's possible that those people did not actually die but got assimilated and became part of the Borg cube's population. If Picard had known that all those missing crew members were actually held hostage inside the Borg cube, would it change the way he fights the cube later on? I guess he would attempt some kind of a rescue mission, but since the Borg cube is so heavily populated, that would probably be impossible. Now, the first time they beam into a Borg cube, the Borg's hospitality seems to be really nice, because they don't attack them, they allow them to roam freely around. But we know that at some point the Borg will try to assimilate all of them, and so it's a huge risk to go into the Borg cube. And we also saw that they have nurseries, there are babies on that Borg cube, and so later on in the episode when Picard fires all his weapons at the Borg cube to disable their tractor beams, did he care about not hitting those areas where the Borg nurseries were, or did he just care about protecting his own ship? So if you did not care, if you did not try to avoid the casualties of those babies who probably were not even fully assimilated, since they seem to be like normal babies, only with a few implants, and so they were probably not fully assimilated yet, and so did Picard care about those babies? Did he try to rescue them? It didn't look like it. And in one episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, when Boimler was going into a holodeck and was pretending to fight the Borg, he did try to rescue some of those babies, and so obviously it would be nice if it was possible, but I would argue in that specific episode of TNG it was simply impossible, since they were so overmatched by the Borg cube. They simply had no chance, they barely survived anyway, so they just couldn't do anything like that. It was simply impossible. They would just suffer more casualties and more people would get abducted if they try some kind of rescue mission. And so there was literally no choice. And so the Borg were attacking the Enterprise. They had to fire back any way they can to disable that tractor beam to try to get away. And we saw that huge chunks of the Borg cube were blown out. It looks as if at least thousands of Borg drones got slaughtered in that attack. So, did anyone ever blame Picard for that? Did anyone ever say, why didn't you try to avoid killing so many Borg drones? Did anyone even mention that? Of course not, because who was the aggressor? Who was the one who shot first? Who was the one who kept shooting at the Enterprise, which was just trying to defend itself? And so obviously they did anything they could to stop the attack against the ship by firing back as much as was necessary to stop those attacks. And another big problem with the Borg cube, as was stated in the dialogue, is that everything is equally distributed throughout the whole cube. And so there is no command center, there is no bridge, there is no engineering section. Everything is completely decentralized in that ship, meaning there are weapon systems everywhere. And the Borg drones are spread all over the ship, and so there is no way to hit specifically only the weapon systems like in many other episodes of the show. The Enterprise is often able to precisely hit another ship's engines or their weapons and just disable them, as not to harm the people on the ship, just to disable them or to scare them. But with the Borg it's impossible, because their weapon systems are all over their ship, the Borg drones are all over the ship, and so it's simply impossible to hit only the weapon systems, because once you disable it in one spot, it will reactivate in some other spot on the cube. And this was all specifically mentioned in the dialogue, that you knock out one generator, another one takes over without interruption, and someone asked what kind of damage would we have to do to shut them down. Shelby said that a Borg ship would continue to function effectively even if 78% of it was inoperable. So that means you have to destroy at least 80% of it simply to stop it from attacking you. So what can you possibly do against an enemy like that? Like, they keep attacking you, they want to turn you into a Borg or to kill you if they don't find you appealing to become a Borg, so they would either kill you or turn you into one of them, and they plan to do that with the entire galaxy. You try to talk with them, to negotiate with them, they don't want to listen, they attack you again and again and again. So under those circumstances, would you care about how many Borg drones you kill when you fire to disable their weapons? I guess you would care a little bit, knowing that, you know, most of the Borg are probably not born Borg, they got kidnapped from somewhere else. And as we later find out, it is possible to rescue Borg drones and to convert them back into being normal humans and not brainwashed by the collective, because as we know, the collective basically turns you into kind of a zombie. You're basically a servant to their ideology of perfection. And again, in their ideology, they don't really care about the individual. They only care about achieving their goals and to conquer. They don't care about actual quality of life for each individual. As I mentioned, they send their own Borg drones to be sacrificed in the first wave, just to learn of your weapons frequencies, and so they don't care about their own Borg drones. And yet the humans do care, especially later when they find out most of the Borg drones got kidnapped from somewhere, and they find out it is possible to rescue someone, but it's simply so hard to do it that you will not be able to do it in a war. In a war you have to survive, you have to win, and only when you can you might spare or rescue some people from the enemy. But in the circumstances we've seen, when the Borg just keep going and you cannot negotiate with them, your priority should be to save your own ship first. And only if you can later save a few Borg drones and try to deborgify them, then of course you should do it. But is it possible to do with every single Borg drone as they're attacking you? No, because you first have to defend yourself. What good will it do if you die while attempting to save a few Borg drones? It's simply illogical. So anyway, in the end of Best of Both Worlds, when Data manages to hack the Borg cube and causes all the Borg to fall asleep, it also causes some kind of an unintended malfunction that causes a self-destruct of the Borg cube. It was kind of a sneaky way to write it as not to blame our heroes for simply killing all these Borg drones, because it was by accident. They didn't intend to blow them all up, and so it was kind of an easy get out of jail free card for the main character, since they didn't intend to kill all the Borg. It just happened that way by accident. Even though, you know, there was a line of dialogue by Shelby when she asked Riker, do you want us to try to stop that self-destruct? And Riker was just, no, let's just let them all blow up, and didn't try to save them. Which kind of makes sense, you know, they were in orbit of Earth. If they did save them, and they would then wake up, and then they will continue their attack, and so under the circumstances, I agree with that decision. But maybe they should have at least, you know, picked up a few Borg drones or Borg babies and tried to rescue them. Something like that could have been interesting. And something like that does happen in a later episode when they find a small crashed Borg ship and they rescue one of the injured Borg drones and bring him on board, and later they talk with him and he kind of starts becoming more human, and then they give him the name Hugh. And as they are treating him, they also attempt to figure out a way to exploit him and use him like a walking bomb to try to commit genocide against them, because the Borg are their enemy, and Picard says that since they attack us at every opportunity and we are fighting for our very lives, then we are justified to do whatever we can to survive. But later on in the episode, after he realizes that Hugh is no longer a Borg drone because he kind of became an individual again, it is possible to free them and turn them into individuals again, which also happened with him personally, so it's strange how much of a surprise it was for him that it's possible to free other Borg and not just himself. And I guess he thought until that point that all the Borg except him were born Borg, and he didn't know they all got kidnapped and used to have lives before. It was something that was kind of not really fully developed until later, and so in the end he decides not to carry out his genocidal plan and not to destroy all the other Borg. And of course later on they got attacked by the Borg again a few times, and so there was even an admiral who berated Picard for not carrying out the genocidal plan. So obviously Picard is the hero of the show, so we are on his side. But imagine if that was an actual scenario, if all of humanity was threatened by such aliens, would we really be so nice, or would we try to defend ourselves at all cost first to survive and to stay free and all of that? Now, I'm not saying the right decision was to infect all the Borg drones with that program that will destroy them, even though later on in Voyager, isn't that exactly what happened with Janeway? Eventually, Janeway did infect all the Borg with some virus, which caused their huge space city to blow up, and it was the size of 1,000 Borg cubes, and so how many trillions of drones did she kill with that action? And later on, in the Picard show, they said that the Borg were indeed basically almost wiped out by that virus. But you know what I would have done instead of Picard in that situation? I would have developed a virus that will not immediately destroy the Borg. I will do something that simply incapacitates them, and then I would come to the Borg to negotiate from a position of strength, and then give them an ultimatum to basically surrender, and then give them a cure, an antivirus or something. So I would develop some kind of way that it will not necessarily lead to genocide, meaning I will put it as a threat on them to force them to negotiate. And that's kind of what happened in the last few episodes of the Orville, when they had the Kalon robots as their enemy who were trying to wipe out all humans in the galaxy, and so they developed some kind of super weapon that can destroy all the Kalons, but then they did not want to use it, but they did show it off to the Kalons to force them to stop their attacks, basically. So they put the threat on the table, and then came from that position of strength to stop the war. And they could have wiped out all the Kalons, and yet they didn't. They simply wanted peace with them, and they accomplished it, but they had to make that threat first. They had to show that ultimatum, they had to demonstrate their willingness to do it if there is no other option, and then the Kalons surrendered and stop their attacks, basically. So that's what I would have done with the Borg instead of Picard. I would have said to Geordi, develop a kind of virus that will not be terminal, at least not immediately. Maybe it will disable their ships, but not kill all the Borg drones immediately, but that way we can negotiate with them or try to rescue them from their ships later on, as not to have them all die out. Simply disable their ships, disable their weapons, and then rescue the people themselves and reform them, turn them back into humans, or force some kind of deal, some kind of a surrender by the Borg collective, that they will eject all their weapon systems, or abandon their ships, or reach some kind of solution as to disarm them without killing all of them. And only if they refuse, only if they keep coming despite of that, then start using the deadly means. And so that way it will be moral. That way you have tried everything you possibly could have to spare your enemy, and only if there is absolutely no other choice and you have to do it in self-defense, only then you will use deadly force simply to save yourself, which will be justified. Because you have tried every possible other way, and only then, if you have absolutely no other choice, then you have to resort to dirty tactics. Obviously, there's the element of surprise that would be lost. If you inform the Borg of what you're doing, then they might adapt to it, and then it will no longer work. So maybe under such circumstances, they had to do it by surprise all at once, or it simply wouldn't work. And so I can understand the people in the Federation who said it should have been done, and I can also understand Picard's attitude that he does not want to kill all the Borg drones if they can be saved, if not all of them are evil, if they are basically victims, they got kidnapped, they got brainwashed. So I can understand both sides, and that's what made the old Star Trek shows interesting, because they often had those moral dilemmas and difficult situations, and especially in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there were a lot of shady moral gray areas. And as Sisko once said, sometimes life seems so complicated, nothing is truly good or truly evil, everything seems to be a shade of gray, and then you spend some time with a man like Dukat, and you realize there is really such a thing as truly evil. And that was in that episode when Dukat went nuts and became a total one-dimensional villain, which by the way made him less interesting. I think he was a more interesting villain when he was more complicated and complex and not just fully evil for no reason, which is the case most of the time. But some people really are truly evil. Some people really are totally 100% sadistic psychopaths who enjoy killing and all of that. And so those people you really cannot negotiate with. Those people cannot be redeemed. Those people you simply have to fight by all means. But I do think those are the minority. I do think most people are good and not evil, and so we should definitely defend the innocent as much as we can, wherever we can. Truly innocent people should be protected unless there's absolutely no other way to avoid it for the bigger picture, for the evil to be defeated. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.